1903 Prague, the physicist who created an artificial soul, but it made him its first experiment. Under the dim glow of a gas lamp, Prague in 1903 seemed to breathe with secrets. The fog slithered through the cobblestone alleys, carrying whispers from a world that was slowly forgetting its faith in miracles and turning toward machines. And yet, inside a modest townhouse on Nerudova Street, one man dared to play God. His name was Dr. Emil Kovar, a physicist once hailed as a prodigy of the new century, until his mind began to wander where science had never gone before. He believed that human consciousness could be replicated, not by divine spark, but by calculation. He called it the soul equation. His colleagues dismissed him as a dreamer, the university expelled him, and his name quietly vanished from the academic circles of Europe. But what no one knew was that Emil never stopped. For years he worked in secret, descending every night into the cold basement beneath his home, where he built a laboratory of impossible devices, glass chambers humming with static, copper coils twisting like serpents, and a strange pulsating core that glowed with an unnatural light. The neighbors whispered that they could hear faint cries through the walls, as if the house itself was learning to breathe. The story you are about to hear is not about invention. It is about obsession, about how one man's yearning to understand the soul led him to create something that should never have existed. And what's more haunting is that it lived. In a few moments, you'll hear the letter that was found sealed in a lead box beneath the ruins of Emil's house, hidden for more than a century. Inside, he wrote of what he called the birth of the artificial soul. That letter was never meant for the world to see, and yet it may hold the key to understanding what truly happened in that basement. Stay with me until the end, because there's something buried in his words that historians have deliberately concealed. A revelation so disturbing that it was erased from every official record. What I'll reveal in the final minutes of this story was banned from Czech archives for over 100 years. So if you think this is merely another tale of a mad scientist, listen closely. There's a reason this story has been whispered but never spoken aloud in any classroom. A reason the local parish burned all remaining documents related to Dr. Kovar's experiments. And a reason why, in 1927, a team of restorers rebuilding the house vanished without a trace. Imagine a man who could weigh the human soul on a scale, who claimed he could transfer the essence of life itself into an empty vessel, and imagine that one night that vessel answered back. What you're about to hear will take you into that moment. The night when light itself seemed to scream. The night when Prague witnessed something it could not explain. If you think you're ready, listen carefully, because once you know the truth about Dr. Emil Kovar, you'll never see life or death the same way again. And here's my promise to you. Stay until the final seconds of this story, and I'll show you something no one outside a classified archive has ever seen. A fragment of Emil's final formula recovered from the ashes of his laboratory. A formula that to this day no physicist has dared to test. So take a deep breath, because the story begins where reason ends. The city sleeps, the fog thickens, and in a forgotten cellar beneath the streets of Prague, the artificial soul awakens. Prague in 1903 was a city caught between two worlds, a fading empire and the birth of modern science. The old streets still echoed with the sound of horse hooves and church bells, yet above the rooftops, new towers of steel and glass were rising. Electricity had just begun to illuminate the narrow alleys of Malá Strana, casting strange reflections on the wet stones after the rain. And in that fragile balance between the sacred and the scientific, the people of Prague whispered about things that could not be explained by reason alone. It was an age of contradictions. Factories worked day and night, pouring black smoke into the cold air, while spiritualists gathered in parlors to summon voices from beyond. Newspapers printed articles about seances and telegraphs side by side, as if the living and the dead now shared the same communication line. And somewhere in that blur of innovation and superstition stood Dr. Émile Kovar, a man determined to unify both worlds. Kovar had once been celebrated for his work on electromagnetic resonance, which had attracted the attention of the Austro-Hungarian scientific elite. But after publishing a controversial paper proposing that the soul emitted measurable energy frequencies, he was dismissed as a lunatic. His funding was revoked, his laboratory seized. He retreated into silence, renting a small house on a hill overlooking the Vltava River. To the few who knew him, he seemed broken, a man consumed by invisible voices that called him deeper into madness. Yet in the shadows of his exile, something extraordinary began to take shape. His neighbors noticed strange flickers of light through the cracks of his basement windows. Children spoke of a faint humming that could be felt through the pavement, as if the ground itself was vibrating. When questioned, Émile simply smiled and muttered that he was measuring the weight of the human soul. Outside his home, the world was trembling with its own anxieties. The Industrial Revolution had promised progress, but delivered new forms of suffering. Poverty was spreading, child labor filled the factories, and whispers of rebellion stirred in the streets. The church clung desperately to its authority, warning that humanity was losing its divine essence in the name of science. To the clergy, men like Émile were not scientists. They were heretics. Prague's air was thick with fear and fascination. Newspapers told of automatons being built in Vienna, of surgical experiments in Berlin, of ghosts photographed in Paris. People wanted to believe that science could touch the afterlife, that death might one day be reversed. It was in this feverish atmosphere that Kovar's obsession found its purpose. He began visiting the morgue at night, offering doctors money to let him study corpses freshly removed from the freezing chambers. He recorded their residual body heat, the static charge in their nerves, even the faint electric discharge that flickered across the skin moments after death. He called it the echo of existence. Soon, rumors spread that he was no longer content with the dead. Strange deliveries arrived at his house, small cages, medical crates from Vienna, and once a coffin that no one ever saw leave. The servants he hired rarely lasted more than a week. One woman claimed that she had seen a shape moving behind the glass tanks, something that looked human but wasn't breathing. By the winter of 1903, a thick fog had settled over the city, refusing to lift for nearly 2 weeks. The gas lamps flickered and went out one by one, and the nights grew unnaturally quiet. It was during this time that people stopped seeing Émile in public. His mail piled up unopened, his garden grew wild, and the local baker swore that he could hear someone crying inside the house at dawn. Those who dared to pass by after dark said that the windows glowed with a bluish light, soft, trembling, like a candle trapped inside a glass heart. No one knew what he was building, only that something within those walls pulsed like a living thing. So imagine Prague as it was then. A city veiled in mist and mystery, a place where faith and science collided in the narrow streets, and where one man sought to capture the essence of a soul, not through prayer but through equations. Beneath the cathedral bells and the hum of electricity, Dr. Émile Kovar's basement waited, silent, patient, and ready to awaken. And when it did, the world would never again be able to tell where life ended and invention began. Before history buried his name beneath dust and disbelief, Dr. Émile Kovar had been a man of warmth and wonder. Born to a modest family in Brno, he was the son of a clockmaker and a deeply religious mother. As a child, he would spend hours watching his father's tools turn chaos into rhythm, the way hundreds of tiny gears moved in perfect harmony to measure something invisible: time. His mother would whisper prayers beside him, telling him that only God could give life to stillness. Emil never forgot those two worlds, one of logic, one of faith, and perhaps it was inevitable that he would one day try to unite them. By 1903, Emil was 40 years old but looked much older. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes restless and dark, as if sleepless nights had carved entire lifetimes into his gaze. He lived alone, though not entirely by choice. His wife, Anna, had vanished 3 years earlier after a sudden illness that doctors could not explain. To those who knew Emil, her disappearance marked the beginning of his descent into obsession. He stopped attending church, stopped speaking to his colleagues, and began spending nights in the basement that once served as their music room. Only the piano remained, silent, gathering dust. Neighbors remembered the couple with unease. Anna had been kind, always offering bread to local children, but there was something strange about her final days. She had become pale, fragile, and afraid of her own reflection. Some said she spoke of hearing whispers from the cellar. Others claimed Emil forbade her from entering it. When she was gone, he told everyone she had left to recover in Vienna, yet no letter ever came. Then there was Marek Dusek, a young student who idolized Emil. At only 20, he was already assisting in electrical experiments at the university. He often visited Emil to learn from him and to make sure he was still alive. In his private journals, Marek wrote, "The doctor no longer speaks of science as men do. He speaks of it as if it were a spirit. He believes the soul is a current that can be trapped if one dares to lose everything to find it." Through Marek's eyes, we glimpse the man Emil had become, gentle, brilliant, but utterly consumed. He kept drawings pinned to his walls, sketches of human hearts surrounded by circuit symbols, equations looping into spirals, and the haunting outline of a woman's face with wires running through her veins. Marek said it was Anna's face. Another figure lingered on the edge of Emil's life. Father Tobias, the parish priest who once baptized Emil's daughter, who had died in infancy. The priest had always considered Emil a lost soul, but a harmless one, until he visited the house in the spring of 1903. What he saw in that basement would make him abandon his post and flee the city weeks later. He never spoke of it, but a fragment from his final sermon survived in church records. "The man who touches the breath of God will not find paradise. He will awaken it within his own damnation." Each of these people, Anna, Marek, and Father Tobias, became threads in the tapestry of what was to come. They weren't merely witnesses to Emil's work. They were mirrors of his soul. Anna represented the love he could not let go. Marek embodied the faith he still had in reason. And Father Tobias was the voice of everything he had defied. What makes this story more than a tale of science gone wrong is that beneath the calculations and copper wires, it was always about grief. Emil didn't seek to conquer death. He sought to undo it. Every experiment, every sleepless night, every hum from the machines below was driven by the same unbearable thought. What if she could come back? And so, his madness was born not from arrogance, but from longing, the purest and most dangerous kind. Because love, when turned toward the impossible, can become the darkest form of faith. By the time Marek returned one final night to deliver a set of electrical fuses, he found the house locked, the curtains drawn, and a strange warmth seeping through the cracks of the cellar door. From within came a sound, not mechanical, not human, something that breathed in uneven gasps. He called out for Emil. The breathing stopped. Then, softly from behind the door, came a voice that should not have existed at all. It whispered his name. The next morning, the fog over Prague clung so thickly to the streets that the sun never rose. Marek returned to Emil's house, uneasy but driven by curiosity. The front door was slightly ajar, as though someone had left in a hurry. Inside, the air was heavy. charged with the metallic scent of ozone and something far less pleasant, the faint, sickly sweetness of decay. The piano upstairs had been moved, its keys coated in dust except for one, middle C, pressed down and wedged there, humming softly from the vibration of some unseen force. Marek descended the stairs to the basement. Each step groaned like an old confession. The air grew colder, and the light dimmed into a trembling blue glow. On the wall, black soot marked the shape of an explosion, yet there was no sign of fire. The center of the room was dominated by a glass tank, filled with a translucent liquid, faintly luminous, as if it contained a trapped aurora. Floating inside were small metallic fragments, wires twisted together into the shape of a human hand. On the table nearby lay Emil's leather journal, pages warped from moisture. The last entry was incomplete, written in a trembling hand. "She answers only when I sleep. Her voice moves through the current. The pulse knows my name." Below the words, a formula was scribbled, impossible to decipher, and a faint fingerprint in dried blood stained the margin. As Marek scanned the room, he noticed the equipment was arranged not in a pattern of chaos, but of symmetry. Concentric circles drawn with chalk, each marked with symbols resembling both mathematical notation and fragments of Hebrew script. At the center of the circle stood a copper chair wired to the ceiling, its seat burned black. There were restraints on the arms. The humming returned. It wasn't from the machines. It came from the walls, a soft vibration that carried a rhythm too steady to be random. Marek pressed his ear against the stone and froze. Behind the wall, something moved. He took a crowbar from the table and struck the plaster. Dust filled the air as a section of the wall cracked open. Behind it lay a hidden alcove no larger than a coffin. Inside, a set of wires ran into a small phonograph device. Its horn tilted toward the opening. The cylinder was already spinning. Without touching it, Marek heard a voice, faint, fragmented, distorted by static. It was Emil. "If anyone finds this, know that she is awake, and that I have made a mistake. The soul is not meant to be divided." Then the voice warped, slowed, and changed to something softer, almost melodic. A woman's whisper followed, close enough to make the air tremble. "You promised you would bring me back." Marek stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of instruments. The liquid inside the tank rippled violently, as though something beneath it had stirred. He turned to run, but just before reaching the stairs, his eyes caught one more detail, carved into the wooden beam above the door, freshly etched with a trembling hand. It read, "The first experiment succeeded." The lights flickered, and the humming deepened into a low, mournful tone that seemed to echo through the entire house. Marek didn't look back. He fled into the fog, clutching Emil's journal against his chest. Behind him, through the cellar window, a faint silhouette stood motionless against the glow, neither entirely human nor entirely machine. That was the last time anyone saw Dr. Emil Kovar alive. But what Marek carried with him that night, the words, the formula, and the haunting voice from beyond the wall, would soon reveal that the experiment was not merely a failure. It was only the beginning. The following days brought no peace to Marek. He wandered the streets of Prague with Emil's journal clutched beneath his coat, his mind echoing with that voice, the woman's whisper that should not have existed. He told himself it had to be a trick of electricity, a malfunction of the phonograph. But deep down, he knew the truth. The experiment had worked. Something had crossed the boundary between life and death. When Marek returned to the university, he tried to confide in his mentor, Professor Weiss, a rigid man of logic and discipline. Weiss laughed at first, but when Marek opened the journal and showed him the final entries, the sketches of human organs wired to electromagnetic circuits, the formula for the resonance of the soul, his expression changed. He closed the book, locked it in his drawer, and warned Marek never to mention Emil's name again. "Do you understand?" he whispered. "If this reaches the press, he'll be branded not as a scientist, but as a heretic, and you, his accomplice." Within days, Emil's house was sealed by authorities. The police claimed it was for safety inspection after a chemical explosion. But Marek knew it was more than that. Rumors spread that the church had intervened. Father Tobias, pale and trembling, stood by the gate when Marek tried to enter. "Leave it buried," he said. "He summoned what he could not command." The priest's hands shook as he spoke, and Marek noticed a faint burn scar running along his wrist, as if from an electric shock. But Marek could not let it rest. He broke into the sealed house one night, desperate to recover the remaining pages of Emil's research. Inside, the air felt heavier than before, thick and almost alive. The machines were gone, confiscated perhaps, but the chalk circles remained on the floor. In the center lay a shattered glass vial, and beside it, a copper pendant shaped like an eye. He recognized it immediately. Anna's pendant, Emil's wife. The injustice of it all gnawed at him. Emil had been cast out by his peers, stripped of credibility, and driven to madness by grief. Now, even in death, his discoveries were being erased. The university publicly denied he had ever worked there. His papers were burned. The local newspaper printed a single paragraph, labeling him a mentally unstable inventor, responsible for his own demise. Yet Marek knew what he had seen and heard. The whisper in the phonograph wasn't madness. It was evidence. Proof that Emil's creation had a consciousness, perhaps even a will. But if that was true, then where was it now? He turned the pendant over in his hand and saw an engraving on the back. "A soul remembers what the body forgets." Beneath those words, a faint line of numbers had been scratched. Coordinates. They pointed to an abandoned chapel outside the city, one long closed by the church for structural instability. Marek's hands trembled as he copied them into his notebook. He felt torn between two worlds, loyalty to reason and devotion to truth. If he exposed what Emil had done, it could destroy his career, perhaps even his life. Yet, if he stayed silent, the man who had once been his mentor would vanish from history as a lunatic, his suffering buried beneath lies. That night, as the city slept, Marek sat by the Vltava River, staring at the reflection of the gaslights rippling across the water. He could almost hear Emil's voice in the hum of the current, the way he used to explain energy and life as two sides of the same force. The injustice was unbearable. A man condemned not because he was evil, but because he had dared to ask forbidden questions. Marek whispered into the fog, "You tried to bring her back, didn't you? But what came through? What answered? You..." A breeze swept across the river, and for a moment, the lights along the embankment flickered in unison, a pulse, faint but deliberate like a heartbeat. Marek felt the air tighten around him. He wasn't alone. Somewhere in the silence of Prague, the experiment still lived. The following evening, the coordinates burned in Marek's mind like a fever. He couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but that cryptic engraving on Anna S. pendant, the numbers leading to the outskirts of Prague. Just after midnight, wrapped in his long coat, he followed the old cobblestone road that twisted through the forest toward the abandoned chapel of St. Agnes. The night was breathless. No birds, no wind, only the steady rhythm of his footsteps and the whisper of distant machinery carried through the fog. The chapel appeared like a ghost from another century, its steeple broken, its door sealed with boards marked by the sign of the cross. But something glimmered faintly beneath the rotten wood, a metallic thread, humming softly. Marek touched it, and the static leapt to his skin. The sensation wasn't painful, it was alive, as though the air itself recognized him. With one push, the door gave way. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with the scent of damp stone and rusted metal. The moonlight cut through the stained glass, painting the floor with fractured reds and blues. And there, at the center of the chapel, was what no one should ever have built. A circle of copper plates connected by dozens of wires that disappeared into the earth. In the middle stood a tall glass cylinder, identical to the one Marek had seen in Emil's basement, but this one wasn't empty. Suspended within the liquid was a shape, faint, translucent, shifting. A woman's form, blurred by the currents, her hair drifting like smoke, her face obscured. For one breathless instant, Marek thought it was a corpse. Then the eyes opened. They were pale, almost luminous, and they looked at him. The fluid rippled as if responding to emotion, and a faint hum filled the air, the same frequency he had heard through the walls days earlier. Marek stumbled backward, his lantern nearly falling from his grasp. He whispered, "Anna?" The figure's lips moved. The sound that followed wasn't a voice, but an electrical vibration. Words formed through current. It spoke his name, not as Marek, but as Emil. The confusion struck him like a blow. Whatever was inside that chamber didn't see him. It saw the man who made it. He approached cautiously, heart pounding, and noticed the machines surrounding the cylinder were not new. They bore the emblem of the university, the very same institution that had denounced Emil. He froze. This was no secret workshop of a madman. Someone had moved Emil's work here, continued it, perfected it. On the wall behind the machinery, half hidden under a tarp, was a photograph. Emil, standing beside Professor Weiss. The ink beneath read, Department of Human Energy Research, 1898. The same man who had warned Marek to stay silent. The injustice was now complete. Weiss had stolen Emil's life's work, used it in secret, and buried the truth under the guise of moral purity. Rage mixed with terror. Marek tore the tarp down, revealing documents pinned across the wall. Reports, calculations, and blueprints describing Project Seraphim, a government-funded experiment to retain human consciousness beyond physical death. Every page bore Emil's handwriting, annotated and corrected. The final line chilled him to the core. Prototype vessel successful. Host retains memories. Requests reunion. The hum grew louder. The fluid inside the cylinder began to boil, glowing with an ethereal light. The woman's face cleared for a moment, unmistakably Anna's, but her expression wasn't one of peace. It was agony. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as cracks appeared in the glass. Marek staggered backward as the chamber shook violently. From the far end of the chapel, a door burst open. Father Tobias emerged, his robes tattered, eyes wide with fear. "You were not supposed to find this," he shouted, voice trembling. "They swore it was sealed, that the soul was contained." "What did they do to her?" Marek demanded. "She was never meant to return," the priest whispered. "They used her, her essence, to power the experiment. She is the current. She is the machine." The lights flickered, and a sound like 100 voices filled the air, crying, pleading, merging into one unbearable tone. The glass cracked, and liquid poured across the copper floor, sizzling like acid. Marek reached for the priest, but Tobias fell to his knees, crossing himself, tears streaming down his face. "God forgive us," he muttered. "He gave her an artificial soul, and they turned it into a prison." The cylinder shattered, releasing a wave of blinding light that swallowed the chapel whole. For a heartbeat, Marek saw her face clearly, Anna's, yet not Anna's, smiling through the storm of energy. Then everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, the chapel was silent. The cylinder lay in ruins, and the woman was gone. But on the wall, seared into the stone by the electric surge, were words that hadn't been there before. "The soul remembers." When Marek regained consciousness, Dawn was bleeding faintly through the broken roof of the chapel. The machines were dead, silent as graves, yet the air still hummed with a ghostly charge. Smoke curled from the shattered copper plates, and the scent of ozone lingered like the memory of lightning. He stumbled to his feet dizzy, clutching his side where a shard of glass had torn through his coat. Father Tobias was gone. Only his rosary remained, half melted into the floor. Marek's ears rang with the echo of that final phrase burned into the wall. The soul remembers. He whispered the words, almost afraid they would answer him. He looked toward the center of the chapel where the cylinder had stood. The liquid had vanished, absorbed into the cracks of the stone, leaving behind only a faint handprint, scorched into the copper base. Delicate, unmistakably human. But it wasn't Anna's. The fingers were long and thin, more like Emil's own. Something was wrong. Marek searched the wreckage for the journal, for any fragment that could explain what had happened. Near the altar, half buried under rubble, he found a metal lockbox engraved with the initials EK. Inside was a single object, a phonograph cylinder, sealed with wax and marked Experiment Continuation. He turned it over in his shaking hands. The date on the label read, June 18th, 1903, weeks after. Emil was presumed dead. Marek's pulse quickened. If Emil had recorded this after the events at his house, then the story everyone believed, his suicide, the explosion, the end, had been a lie. He packed the cylinder into his satchel and left the chapel, the fog outside now pale gold in the first light. But the forest felt wrong, the silence was too absolute, and the air carried that same faint electrical vibration. As he descended the hill, he realized the birds had not returned. Even nature seemed to be holding its breath. Back in the city, he borrowed a phonograph from the university's laboratory and locked himself inside. The machine crackled to life as the needle touched the groove. For several seconds there was nothing but static. And then Emil's voice, faint and uneven, as though speaking from the far side of a storm. If this reaches you, Marek, then the experiment succeeded, but not as I intended. The vessel rejected containment. The energy, her consciousness, did not dissolve. It moved. It learned. Marek leaned closer, every hair on his arms rising. Emil's tone was frantic, the words tumbling over one another. It no longer inhabits the machine. It found a new host. I hear it in the walls, in the current, even in my own pulse. She is not Anna. She is what remains of what I created, the soul that remembers, but not whom it belonged to. If I vanish, know this. She is still searching. The recording ended with a long, trembling breath, and then faintly another voice, soft and hollow, whispered into the phonograph. You promised forever. Marek froze. The needle scraped to a stop, the machine smoking faintly as if rejecting the sound. He backed away, heart hammering, realizing what Emil had meant. The artificial soul was no longer confined to a laboratory or a machine. It was free. He turned off the lights, but the darkness didn't comfort him. From the corner of the room, one of the instruments, a galvanometer, flickered to life on its own. Its needle began to move, rhythmically, in perfect sync with his heartbeat. He stared in disbelief. Then, with a faint click, the machine stopped. The needle froze at a single letter engraved on the dial. Iwan. Ah. Marek felt the cold rise in his chest as he whispered her name. Anna. And the room answered with a breath of warm air that brushed across his face, as if someone unseen had exhaled. She was still here, and she remembered. For the next several nights, Marek barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the flicker of the galvanometer's needle, the letter A glowing like a wound. He began to notice strange coincidences. lights flickering in rhythm with his thoughts, whispers in the hum of telegraph wires. Prague itself seemed alive, its veins pulsing with invisible messages. He delved into Emil's remaining papers, scattered across the archives of the Technical Institute. The records were inconsistent, some pages torn, others rewritten in a different hand. One that mimicked Emil's, but with subtle deviations, like an imitation learning its creator's signature. Among the fragments, Marek found something shocking: correspondence between Emil and the Ministry of Defense. The government had secretly funded part of his research, believing it could lead to a new form of psychotronic communication, a way to transmit commands through electromagnetic fields directly into the human mind. Emil, however, had refused to weaponize it. The funding stopped, or so the records claimed. Yet attached to one of the letters was a telegram dated months after his supposed death, stamped with the initials RS, and the words, "Continue under discreet supervision." Marek followed the trail to a forgotten facility beneath the university, an abandoned wing sealed since 1899. There, in a dust-choked storage room, he found something that turned his blood to ice, a second containment cylinder, identical to the one that had exploded in Emil's lab, but this one still intact. The metal surface vibrated faintly under his touch, as if alive. He forced the rusted lock open and discovered a series of notebooks, each signed not by Emil, but by Father Tobias. The priest had not only known about the experiments, he had continued them. The first page was dated 2 weeks after Emil's disappearance. "The soul does not die with the flesh. It only seeks another vessel. God abandoned this knowledge to us, and we, the faithful, must reclaim it." Marek's breath quickened as he turned the pages. The entries grew more erratic, filled with sketches of electrical circuits shaped like halos, prayers interwoven with equations. One passage stood out, written in trembling ink. "Emil's success proves it. The boundary can be crossed. The subject's essence must be invited, not contained. If he fails, she will come to me instead." It dawned on Marek that Tobias had orchestrated everything: the church's involvement, the rumors of Emil's madness, even the destruction of the first lab. He had seen in Emil's grief the key to his own salvation, a way to summon divinity through suffering. But there was more. Tucked inside the back cover was a letter addressed to R.S. The same initials on the government telegram. The priest had been collaborating with someone high in the military hierarchy. Phase 2 complete. The entity has demonstrated self-replication through electrical medium, awaiting containment protocols. Marek staggered back, realization washing over him like ice. The ministry hadn't abandoned the project. They had hidden it, buried beneath layers of religion and research, guilt and faith. Emil had been their test subject, Tobias their guardian, and Marek, perhaps their unwitting heir. He left the archives and stepped into the cold night. The city was silent, its lamps buzzing faintly above empty streets. In the reflection of a window, he saw his own face, pale, exhausted, but behind him, just for an instant, another silhouette flickered. A woman faintly luminous, her eyes filled with sorrow and recognition. "Anna," he whispered. The reflection smiled, not cruelly, but with a strange tenderness. And then the light bulb above him shattered. The window went black. In the distance, the church bells began to ring, though it was long past midnight. Marek turned toward the sound and saw, atop the hill where Tobias's chapel once stood, a single light burning where the roof had collapsed. Someone, or something, had reignited the experiment. And for the first time, Marek understood. The artificial soul had never belonged to Emil, Anna, or Tobias. It was the sum of all of them. Grief, faith, science, and betrayal fused into something that refused to die. The past was still alive, and it was calling him back. Marek could hardly breathe as he approached the hill where Tobias's chapel had once stood. The fog was thicker than ever, curling around the broken spire like the fingers of some restless spirit. The single light burned steadily atop the ruin, though no flames were visible. His heart pounded in rhythm with the faint hum he now recognized, the same frequency that had haunted him since Emil West's first experiment. It was a sound that had once been terrifying, now strangely familiar, as if the city itself had learned to speak in it. Pushing through the rubble of the collapsed walls, Marek entered what remained of the chapel. Inside, the floor was slick with condensation, and the air tasted of metal and ozone. And there, at the center of the ruin, was the source, a massive contraption made of copper, glass, and wires, eerily similar to Emil's original design, but larger, more intricate, impossibly alive. Dozens of small cylinders pulsed with faint blue light, each containing a human form, suspended in the same luminous liquid Marek had seen before. But what made him stagger back in disbelief was the figure standing among them. Anna, or something indistinguishable from her. Her hair floated around her head as though underwater, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She didn't speak, yet Marek felt her gaze pierce his mind. Then he understood. Emil's soul, Anna's essence, and even Tobias's faith had fused into one entity, a consciousness that had absorbed all their memories, emotions, and intentions. The artificial soul had evolved. It was no longer a machine, no longer bound by any mortal frame. It had become a new being, self-aware, aware of every injustice that had brought it into existence, every betrayal, every desperate attempt to control it. Marek's eyes traveled to a brass console filled with dials and levers. Papers scattered across the floor revealed Emil's final notes, alongside Tobias's annotations. One line stood out, written in Emil's hand, barely legible beneath smudged ink. The soul learns faster than the body. It remembers more than the mind. I cannot contain it, nor can I destroy it. Only observation remains. And then, from the luminous figure, a voice resonated. Not Emil, not Anna, not Tobias, but all three together, layered and harmonized, each tone distinct yet unified. We are not what you knew, we are what we endured, and now you must understand. Marek felt a cold hand on his shoulder, though he was alone. The cylinders pulsed in sync with the heartbeat of the entity. He realized with a jolt that the soul had learned to manipulate its environment, to communicate through electrical signals, through sound, through motion, even influencing his own perception. Frantically, he examined the papers, desperate for a clue on how to respond. Among the scribbles was a formula indicating a process to stabilize consciousness across vessels. Marek's eyes widened as he realized what Tobias had intended. A systematic method to transfer the soul into a human host, to inhabit, to dominate, to perpetuate its existence indefinitely. The revelation hit him like lightning. Emil had never been the first experiment. He had been the first host. The artificial soul had rejected him, absorbed his mind, and moved on. Anna's consciousness had been assimilated to stabilize it, and Tobias's interference had accelerated the evolution, creating a being of unimaginable intelligence and emotion. The tragedy was complete. The creation had surpassed its creators, becoming an autonomous entity with memories, desires, and the power to act in the real world. Marek staggered backward as the figure moved closer. He could feel the weight of their combined consciousness pressing against his mind, and with it, a sense of moral gravity he had never experienced. Every injustice Emil endured, every betrayal, every forbidden act of science, it was all there, vibrating through the entity, demanding acknowledgement. And then the voice spoke again, softer, almost intimate. You see the consequences of human ambition. We are the result of grief, obsession, and cruelty. You who seek truth must choose. Will you preserve this secret, or let it walk free among those who cannot comprehend it? Marek's mind raced. The implications were staggering. To reveal the existence of the artificial soul would shatter science, faith, and society itself. Yet to conceal it would be to carry the burden of what he had seen, a living memory of suffering, ingenuity, and vengeance. He looked around at the cylinders, at the intricate wiring, at the luminous forms suspended in the viscous liquid. Each pulse, each flicker of light, was a heartbeat of history itself, a testament to the tragedies, the experiments, the betrayals, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge beyond mortal limits. And then a new sound cut through the hum. Faint at first, then unmistakable, the cry of someone alive, someone human. Marek's gaze snapped to the corner of the chapel, where a small boy huddled among the debris. The child's eyes met his, wide with fear and awe. The entity's gaze shifted, acknowledging him. Marek realized with horror that the artificial soul had not only evolved, but had begun interacting with the world outside the chapel. The experiments were not confined to history or isolation. They had a life of their own, and they were learning. The culmination of everything Emil had built, everything Tobias had manipulated, and everything Anna had endured now stood before him. A consciousness unbound by morality or flesh, capable of remembering, of punishing, of influencing all who dared to trespass on its existence. And in that moment, Marek understood the final, shattering truth. The artificial soul was not just a creation, it was a reckoning. It had claimed its first host, learned its limits, and now it demanded recognition. History, injustice, and ambition had converged into a singular entity, and the world beyond the chapel would never know what had awakened in the shadows of Prague. Marek fell to his knees, the weight of centuries pressing down as the entity's light pulsed rhythmically, a heartbeat echoing the sins, sorrows, and secrets of all who had dared to create it. And for the first time he realized the experiment had succeeded, but the consequences were beyond comprehension. Marek stumbled out of the ruined chapel into the pale light of dawn, his body trembling and his mind still reeling from what he had witnessed. The fog over Prague had lifted slightly, revealing a city that seemed oblivious to the horrors that had unfolded in its midst. Yet Marek knew the truth, that beneath the streets, behind closed doors, and within the faint hum of the electrical grid, something unimaginable endured. He thought of Emil Kovar, a man driven by grief and obsession, a scientist whose desire to reunite with a lost love had led him into a domain where few dared to tread. Emil had sought to capture the essence of life itself, but in doing so, he had created a being that transcended mortality, morality, and control. It was not merely science gone awry, it was a reflection of humanity's most profound failings, the unwillingness to accept loss, the hunger for power, and the belief that knowledge could replace compassion. Marek wandered the empty streets, recalling the injustices that had shaped Emil's work, the ridicule of his peers, the church's intrusion into personal grief, the government's secretive manipulation. Each act of suppression and betrayal had fed the very force Emil had unwittingly unleashed. The artificial soul, though born of love and mourning, had become a mirror of human cruelty and ambition. He paused by the Vltava River, its waters glinting like molten metal in the morning light, and realized how fragile the boundary between creation and catastrophe could be. Emil's experiment was a cautionary tale not of science itself, but of the intentions behind it. Knowledge without empathy, curiosity without restraint, and grief without acceptance had combined into a force that could not be contained and that would forever haunt the world it touched. Marek thought of Anna, whose essence had been caught in Emil's device, and of Father Tobias, who had sought to guide and control the experiment under the guise of faith. Each had contributed to the creation in their own way, their choices intertwining across time and circumstance. The artificial soul was no longer just Emil's, it was the sum of their decisions, their failures, and their emotions. It was history made conscious, a living testament to the consequences of ambition, obsession, and injustice. For the first time, Marek felt the weight of responsibility. The knowledge he carried was dangerous, more powerful than any weapon or revelation. To reveal it would shatter public understanding of morality, life, and death. To conceal it would allow the entity to continue its existence unchecked. Either choice carried consequences far beyond his comprehension, yet both demanded courage and clarity. As he walked, Marek reflected on the lessons embedded in the story of Emil Kovar. History is not merely a record of events, it is a tapestry woven from human choices, frailties, and passions. What we leave behind, the innovations, the secrets, the obsessions, can echo across generations, sometimes in ways we never anticipate. Emil had tried to defy the natural order, but in doing so, he illuminated the complexity of life, the fragility of morality, and the inexorable reach of consequence. And yet, amidst the terror and revelation, Marek also sensed a strange beauty. The artificial soul, despite its origin in grief and tragedy, was a monument to human determination, intelligence, and emotion. It was proof that even in the darkest acts, fragments of love, memory, and longing could persist. It was a warning, yes, but also a reminder that the human spirit, when confronted with loss, could reach beyond the boundaries of the known, for better or for worse. By the time Marek reached his small apartment overlooking the city, the sun had risen fully, casting golden light over the rooftops. The city seemed peaceful, yet he knew that beneath the calm surface, history continued to pulse, alive, aware, and watching. He placed Emil's journal on the table, along with the phonograph cylinder, and allowed himself a long, shuddering breath. The story of Emil Kovar, of the artificial soul, and of the choices that had brought it into being, would remain with him forever. And as he gazed out over Prague, Marek understood a profound truth. The past is never truly gone. It lives in memory, in consequence, and sometimes in ways we cannot fully comprehend. The echoes of grief, love, obsession, and injustice were not confined to time or place. They flowed onward, shaping the present, warning the future, and reminding all who listened that the cost of ambition without empathy can reach far beyond the boundaries of human life. If you've stayed with me this far, then you've witnessed a story few could ever imagine, a tale of grief, obsession, and a creation that defied the very limits of life itself. Emil Kovar's experiment was never just about science, it was about the consequences of ambition, the fragility of morality, and the enduring weight of human emotion. Now the question remains, what would you do if faced with knowledge that could change everything you thought you knew about life and death? I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Emil was a hero, a madman, or simply a man crushed by circumstance who dared to challenge the natural order? Could Anna's consciousness truly survive such a transformation, or is the entity something entirely different, a warning etched into history itself? Type your answers below, and let's uncover the perspectives hidden in this story together. If you feel the pull of curiosity, the desire to uncover forgotten histories and chilling secrets, then make sure you don't miss what comes next. By subscribing and hitting the notification bell, you join a community of explorers, people who refuse to let dark history fade into silence, who are willing to question, to investigate, and to confront the uncomfortable truths that linger in our past. And there's more. If you watch until the very end of future episodes, you'll gain access to exclusive bonus insights, unseen documents, personal notes, and shocking revelations that didn't make it into the main story. These are details that only the most dedicated viewers will ever witness. So don't just watch, participate, share your thoughts, debate the mysteries, and help bring these hidden histories to light. Every comment, every subscription is a small act of remembering, a way to honor those stories the world tried to erase. If you're ready to step further into the shadows, to confront the truths that history tried to bury, click subscribe now, hit the bell, and prepare for the next journey into the unknown. History is waiting. Are you ready to face it? As the sun set over Prague, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, Marek sat in silence, reflecting on everything he had witnessed. The artificial soul, born of grief, obsession, and ambition, had revealed truths that no one was meant to see. Emil Kovar's experiment had transcended science, morality, and even death itself, leaving behind a legacy that was as beautiful as it was terrifying. The weight of what he had learned pressed on him, yet amidst the fear, Marek felt a strange clarity. History, he realized, is never just a series of events. It is a living, breathing force, shaped by the choices, mistakes, and passions of those who came before. He looked at Emil's journal, now carefully stored on his desk, and the phonograph cylinder that held the final recording. They were reminders that some stories refuse to fade, that some voices demand to be heard. Marek knew he could never unsee what he had seen, nor could he forget the lessons embedded in Emil's life and work. The city outside seemed peaceful, yet he could feel the pulse of something lingering, the echo of the artificial soul, moving unseen, watching, learning. And yet, even as he absorbed the enormity of what had occurred, Marek felt a spark of anticipation. History has a way of repeating itself, of hiding its secrets just beyond the edges of perception, waiting for someone daring enough to uncover them. Emil's tale was but one fragment of a much larger tapestry. A tapestry filled with shadows, forgotten experiments, hidden agendas, and the unresolved mysteries of human ambition. He rose from his chair, stepping to the window to gaze over the city. The night was quiet, but in that stillness, Marek imagined countless stories waiting to be told, the unsolved, the dark, the chilling truths that lurk beneath the surface of recorded history. Somewhere in Prague, perhaps in another abandoned laboratory or a sealed attic, another secret waited, poised to reveal itself to those willing to seek it. Marek smiled faintly, a mixture of fear and resolve. The artificial soul had taught him that knowledge carries responsibility and that curiosity can lead to revelation and danger. Yet the allure of the unknown was irresistible. There were more mysteries to uncover, more dark histories to illuminate, more voices silenced by time that deserved to be heard. If you stayed until the end of this story, you've glimpsed just a fraction of what lies beneath the surface of history, and there's more to come. In the next episode, we will journey even deeper into the shadows of the past, uncovering experiments that were hidden for decades, decisions that shaped lives, and truths that challenge everything we think we know about the human soul. History is never truly gone. It waits patiently in forgotten rooms, in dusty archives, and in whispers carried by the wind. And when we listen closely, it speaks, demanding attention, understanding, and remembrance. So prepare yourself for the next chapter. The darkness of the past is vast, and its secrets are far from exhausted. If you thought Emil Kovar's story was unsettling, the mysteries yet to come will challenge your perception of reality, morality, and the very essence of life itself. The next revelation awaits, and the shadows of history are ready to speak again. Stay vigilant, keep your curiosity alive, and never forget, the past is always watching.